Now it's time for our panel on ending hunger. As I mentioned, we have Representative Hannah Kane, Senator Joe Comerford, Catherine D'Amato, CEO of the Greater Boston Food Bank, and Aaron McAleer, President and CEO of Project Red, and our moderator, Karen Holmes-Ward, who is the head of public affairs, WCBP-TV, the host of Cityline, and equally important, a longtime advocate and supporter of the Greater Boston Food Bank and this issue in general. Thank you so much, Karen. It's your show. Thank you. And thank you, panelists.
Thank you, George. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And thank you so much for being here with us to eavesdrop on this very important conversation. We have some of the leading thought leaders in Massachusetts on this topic, and I'm anxious for us to get into the discussion. We'll have an opportunity later in the program for some of you to ask some questions, but let's get rolling here. I am going to kick it off and ask each of you to not only introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the lens that you bring to this effort, but also lay out the arguments, the persuasive arguments on why supporting this issue is imperative to our state's future success. And I'm going to ask Senator Comerford to begin.
I'm happy to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen. And thank you, George, and State House News, and all of the sponsors. It's really just such a pleasure to be with you. So I'll just start from where I came to Massachusetts. I've been here for now a long time, but I came from Hunter College School of Social Work with an MSW. And while I was at Hunter College, I did anti-poverty work, of course, as you might imagine, but we looked both at root causes of what drives people into poverty, why there is generational poverty, and then we also looked at intersecting realities, right? How does housing intersect with transportation, intersect with education, and so on, and of course health. So I got here, and one of the first jobs I was able to do in Western Massachusetts, so I represent the Hampshire-Franklin-Worcester district now, I live in Northampton, and when I came to Massachusetts, I directed the programs at the Food Bank of Western Mass. And, you know, and I love and shout out to the Food Bank of Western Mass, you know, off my home in many ways. And what we did at the food bank was we looked immediately, of course, at meeting the immediate needs of hunger, and that's the elder feeding program, Brown Bag. There's meal sites, there's pantries, and that's very important. But at the time I got there, there was a visionary named MASSterList Smith, and she was saying, no, we got to work ourselves out of a job. So we had a program called Target Hunger, and it's actually what Jim was talking about, Congressman, who we love in my part of the world and here, I'm sure. He was talking about really doubling, tripling SNAP dollars so that people could be incentivized to come and use too few SNAP dollars, or at that time, food stamps, and buy from local vendors. And so we did that, and it was years ago, and Jim said that government moves slowly. Well, it does, right? Today we know that that program ended up as HIP, the Healthy Incentives Program, so it feels like a beautiful coming full circle for me in terms of work I piloted to test out for the legislature way back then that I get to fight for with Hannah and all of you now. So when I came to the legislature, I had this belief, right, this sort of systemic belief. But then I layer on the fact that I represent 25 cities and towns, 330 farms in those communities are APR, Agricultural Preservation Restriction farms, hundreds more over that. And I understand coming into the legislature that farmers spend $1 but receive back 94 cents, right? So right there is a losing proposition. And if we want this local food, and we know it's more nutritious, what are we going to do for our farms? And our friends at MDAR are here, and they're going to talk to us about that, I'm sure, over the legislative session. And then I layer over my work in public health. So for the last 2 sessions, I've been the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Public Health. And we look at food as medicine in public health, and we look at the health benefits and the return on investment for nutrition. And we know that tackling diet-related disease, which is part of the White House conference call to action, is completely possible. We know, and we heard at the conference, these story after story of people who had access to nutritious food, often created and produced by our farmers, and their diet-related diseases started to transform. So I come to this work through that lens as well, and understanding the upstream benefit, not only with health and healthcare cost savings, but of course with access to education, access to better jobs when we're healthier. And then the last thing I'll say is that I come to this also from chairing the COVID committee, the COVID-19 and Emergency Preparedness and Management Committee, which the legislature stood up, and I look at now at food systems and what it took for us as a Commonwealth to feed our folks when COVID hit. And frankly, we didn't have enough infrastructure. So the food security infrastructure grant, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, is one of the many pieces of the puzzle that we all worked together while COVID hit to strengthen our food system. So
And
that
I
we're more
can see that you bring so much passion to this
Yes, and I'm going to stop.
Representative Kane, I'm going to turn to you and ask you to speak about this through the lens that you bring to this topic.
Thank you, Karen. Isn't Joe great?
Awesome.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you today. And Catherine was right. When you look out in this audience, you see so many people committed to this cause. And I thank you for all the work that you do. I come through this to this process through a different route. So I grew up in a town where both sets of my grandparents lived with us, and one set of grandparents had a football-sized field garden in their backyard. And my parents also had a very large garden, not as large as my grandparents. I spent most days trying to get out of the house as soon as I could, so that I was not asked to weed the garden. But I grew up on a dirt road, and there were other farmers on the street, and I became very aware at a very young age about all that it takes to produce healthy, nutritious food. And I also became aware of what my grandparents had been through growing up. They were young in the time of the Depression, and you didn't waste a single thing. And if you had excess, you made sure you got it to somebody else who could use it. They had a composting pile out back that, I just thought that's what everybody did until I learned that's not what people do for the most part. And so, my interest in these issues sort of started at a very young age. And then when I came into the legislature, I had a good friend who lives down the street, Commissioner John LeBeau from MDAR, who said to me, oh, there's an opening on the Mass Food Policy Council. You should think about it. I think you'd be interested in it. And that really started my work on a legislative level looking at these issues. And what I realized very quickly is that there is a ton of goodwill and a desire to see progress. But it takes a really deliberate effort of bringing everyone together, both those of us in state government and those of us outside of state government, and importantly, working both of those angles. So another good friend who's sitting here in the audience, Witten Pickoff, suggested to me that I should, along with a few others, including Joe, think about implementing one of the actions in the Mass Food Local Action Plan that said to start a caucus of legislators who were aligned on the issues. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And it's the second largest caucus now on Beacon Hill. It's second only to the Democratic caucus. And actually keep it as the second largest caucus because politically it's not helpful to be the largest caucus. But you can see from all across this state, people are committed to these issues. Legislators recognize that reducing food insecurity is something that we should all be working on, and every single district has this issue. So I come here today as somebody who is just inherently interested in ending hunger, but also interested, as Joe said, in the diet-related diseases. I sit as the ranking minority member on healthcare financing and public health. I see the intersection of these issues. I also sit on the Committee for Racial Equity, Civil Rights, and Inclusion and recognize that this work is incredibly important for that. And at the end of the day, I'm a mom. And when I was a PTO president of schools, I saw the school nurses really having to take on this issue of food insecurity and start to have food available for kids that they could send home with them. When I chaired the board of Andover Newton Seminary, and we spent a lot of time on the board talking about the hunger of our graduate students, something I had not anticipated doing. And as I said, in my district, I have a district that most people would look at and think is fairly well off. I've continued a tradition that was started by the former Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito of hosting a charity golf tournament. We've raised $500,000 in the last 8 years, and 2/3 of that has gone to the 2 food pantries in my district because the need is there. So I'm very excited to be part of this group. I believe this is a whole of government effort that needs to happen, but it also is going to take all of our partners outside of effort. And I really want to applaud our friend, as he said, Congressman McGovern. He is an inspiration, and he's somebody who I am so happy to be doing this work with together, and just want to really recognize all that he has done to get us to where we are.
And let me point out, as I grab the hands of these two ladies, here in Massachusetts, we have bipartisan support. Okay, all right. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Catherine D'Amato, if you would talk to us more about the hunger as a human rights and equity issue and the implications not ending hunger.
Sure, thank you. To continue momentarily with the ag thing, my grandparents were immigrant farmers who came to this country. I spent a lot of time on their farm, and my grandfather used to say we have to use every bit of the pig but the squeal. None of those just pieces about making sure we used it all, whether it was composting or whatever it might be. And then my parents went into the restaurant business when I was 8. So that theme's continued for me, of which my father would say we don't ever let anybody work in exchange for food. So we bring them in and we sit them down. So I always say to my team, it's no wonder I became a food banker because of these themes, right, and finding a way. And when we look at, I'm very pleased and really so much excitement about having representatives that are thinking this way now. And that when you think of looking at disease and health and the intersectionality, this work has been going on for years. And now it has risen to a place of import and understanding all the intersectionality and the connectivity and having the awareness of that. So in Massachusetts, the Hunger to Health Collaboratory, which was started by the Greater Boston Food Bank and Stop and Shop, did a study several years ago that showed the cost of food insecurity to Massachusetts was $2.4 billion. And that was not including insurance. That was the cost to humans, the dollars laid out, the cost in disease, the cost in so many aspects. So we know it's a huge problem, and I would say today, because that study was many years ago, it's more. It's more expensive. We know, based on statewide studies of hunger, that we're looking at 1 in 3 now residents of our Commonwealth are going to face food insecurity in a 12-month period. And that last study published was a year ago, but we're just completing that same study, be the 3rd year. It's now 1 in 3 in our state. It's amazing and frightening to me, and I think for all of us to think about how we can turn that around. So the need rose during the pandemic, and it's staying. And there are lots of reasons which we can go into. But I do think that Massachusetts, as noted by the congressman and others, and you're going to hear this theme, is that we're a small enough state to cause and affect enormous change. And I think that's a significant advantage to our Commonwealth and to the leadership that we have currently happening in the Commonwealth. The opportunity is here. So we can do the work, and the political will is a huge piece of the work. Mm-hmm. And to have the political will and the momentum is going to be significant because the advocates will continue to advocate. I think our challenge on the advocate side is to get us to align, to get us to agree. As Aaron knows, in coordinating the cats around the state, we've put forth, I think, some very good pillars, and which I hope Aaron speaks to more about. But if we can align the advocates and we can align the legislators, I think we already have it in the governor's office with both Healy and Driscoll being committed to this issue, then I think the opportunity to cause and effect change for those that live in our Commonwealth is enormous. And so as we talk about so many issues
the Greater Boston Food Bank is an emergency food provider. 190 cities and towns, but if you look at the whole state, it's 351 states, over 1,000 agencies touching food in some way, shape, or form, and distributing directly into communities. I think our way that we can really be helpful is to support the drive forward, but to not forget that food is needed, whether it's an emergency or ongoing. That issues of access are consistently needed, and issues around, not issues, but solutions around access and solutions around listening to those with lived expertise, but working in community. The communities on the street, they're at the ground level, they know. And I think that's been one of the most advantaged pieces, and your story about Western Mass and taking that program forward is an example. And I'm hopeful that all of us can do that together. In Greater Boston Food Bank, we're committed to community. We're committed to getting that food out the door as much as possible and as nutritious as possible. And the farmers are a big part of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. We want to turn to Erin McAleer from Project Bread to pick up where Catherine has left off. Talk about how you came to this work and what do you see as the implications of not ending hunger here in Massachusetts? Erin.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I'm Erin McAleer. I'm president and CEO of Project Bread. Project Bread's the statewide anti-hunger organization here in Massachusetts. Our work focuses on meeting the immediate need of households that are food insecure today, while simultaneously putting systems in place to permanently solve hunger. And this is deeply personal for me. My mom left an abusive marriage when I was 5 years old. It was an incredibly difficult but necessary decision for the safety of herself and her 3 kids. We became food insecure overnight. She was unable to pay the bills and to feed her kids. And what I remember most about that period of my childhood is the stress in our household. My mom could not meet the basic need of feeding her kids. She was on the phone with my aunt every night saying, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm feeding them pancakes again. I don't know how I'm going to do it. And we at Project Bread hear these stories every single day from callers on our food source hotline, patients that we work with in the health centers, and families that we're working with in schools. And every story is different, but there are pervasive themes. And, it's the dad who's working 2 jobs. He's working 80 hours a week, but he's not making enough money. It's the grandparents that are raising their grandchildren. It's the college student who wants to go back to school and further their education and can't stay in school. And I think what we have to acknowledge is that these are not individual failings. All of these individuals, my mom included, are making the right decisions. The systems around them were failing them. And so first and foremost, we need systemic solutions to systemic problems. This issue in particular, we tend to focus on individualized solutions for a systemic problem. The good news is, and there's been a lot of reference to it, we are leading the way. We have these solutions in place. Today, 400,000 kids in Massachusetts have access to free school meals. That is a systemic solution. That is making sure food is part of our educational system. It's part of their experience. And there's research. Every dollar invested in school meals yields $2 in cost savings in healthcare and an economic opportunity for those kids. A second example is what we're doing in healthcare. It's incredible. Since 2020, Project Bread has served 7,000 patients through partnerships with BMC and Children's Hospital and C3 through this Medicaid program to address the barriers patients are accessing. So this means these patients, when they're meeting with their physician, their pediatrician, and they are identified as food insecure, they're sent to Project Bread. And we're addressing all the barriers that they are facing in food access. And it's not just food. Food is obviously a part of it. 100% it's economics. They just need money to buy food. 88% it's a functioning kitchen. They need a refrigerator. They need pots and pans. So we are addressing these barriers, and early indicators show what we all know is that when you give people food, it improves your health, and it saves healthcare costs money. So these are examples, I would say, of systemic change, ways that we're already leading the way here in Massachusetts. And I think I'll just say the reason systemic change is so important is the scale. 21% of families right now are worried about feeding their kids. 33% of Black and Latino families. We need systemic solutions. The scale of this crisis requires it. The second is systemic solutions break stigma. What I experienced 35 years ago, stigma was the #1 barrier my mom was facing. When food is part of the school day, there's no more stigma. There's no stigma in the classrooms today across Massachusetts. And it also moves us away from this charitable mindset to this problem to a systems solution, making this part of our educational system, making this part of our healthcare system. So I am so excited. Massachusetts is leading the way. The thing I will end with is I think we're doing it. We have the right programs in place, but we're also the movement builders. Massachusetts leads the way. We've done this on a lot of major issues. We're the movement builders. I'm thrilled with how we're leading the way. We have incredible legislative leadership, and that cannot go understated. That alone, I think, is key to solving this issue. We have incredible partners on stage in the audience. We have philanthropists who are supporting efforts to ignite social change, and we can do it. We can build up the momentum of the White House Conference and be the first state to end hunger.
Okay, that's great. You know, right, that deserves applause. We heard the passion of everyone here on the panel. We heard the passion of Jim McGovern in that taped piece, and just building off of the energy that came out of the White House conference. You know, today we want to talk about how we take that national strategy to end hunger, reduce diet-related disease, and increase exercise, and how do we apply it here in Massachusetts, and how do we get it all done by 2030? So let's first define what ending hunger means, how we'll know when we get to the finish line. Catherine, I'm going to ask you to expound on that, and then Erin will go back to you.
You know, what it would look like is that individuals, I mean, Erin, your stories are terrific, and it's true, they're full of stories, that they have the ability to walk through the front door of any food place and any retailer, go to a farmer's market, and have adequate resources to support their family. What it would look like is, you know, the pantry system might evolve into something else, into different ways of getting food or different ways of ensuring that we bring people along. What it would look like is less, as Erin noted, less costly to our state, a healthier state. It would drive so much productivity. I mean, one of the things that the Greater Boston Food Bank's been working with employers, just employers, is how do you make the questions around food security an imperative for businesses? Are HR offices asking about their employees? It's a question that we should all be driving forward. We are a state where healthcare is so integrated, and as we have to move people from hunger to health, and there are so many implications. So Karen, the outcome of this work, I think, it's enormous. It's like throwing a marble or a rock into a puddle. I mean, they're the contiguous, the lines. It just will continue to cascade a benefit, and probably so many benefits we can't articulate, though we have many that we can say. If you are on SNAP as an example, how many meals? Mm-hmm. The Greater Boston Food Bank isn't going to solve hunger through an emergency system, but it is going to help that family or individual in that moment, in that crisis at this time, and then to be able to get them to the next step in the next place that can cause and affect real change. So Karen, I think that the outcomes are enormous, and they're enormous for our state, and they're enormous to create an environment where people can have the dignity and capability to feed themselves. That issue is I mean, what you're saying in terms of your story, Erin, and that pride. I mean, growing up in my family's restaurant business, again, bringing that person to the counter and feeding them, incredibly transformative for me. So you want to walk through the front door, not the back door. You want to be able to have that family excel and be able to make a contribution to Massachusetts. And I assure you, that will happen. They will be able to make an enormous contribution into the Commonwealth's ability to thrive.
All right, Erin, what does ending hunger look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to my own personal experience, and I would say that we're all going to have those in our lifetimes. There's always going to be a job loss, a healthcare diagnosis. There's going to be something that's going to lead us all to be worried about putting food on the table, and 21% again today are experiencing that in Massachusetts. What I envision is that, my mom shouldn't have had to worry about feeding her kids. I actually think she might have left that abusive marriage earlier if she had known that her kids would be fed at school, that there was that reliable food source, and also that she would have that economic burden lifted of trying to figure out how to feed her kids during the week. She wouldn't have faced the stigma of even telling people what. She didn't tell anyone besides my aunt. Our neighbors didn't know. Our teachers didn't know. The stigma around this issue would be gone. And I go back to systems change. I think that to solve hunger, it's integrated into these major systems like the education system and the healthcare system. And that is what I think is, there's always going to be, circumstances that, our economic mobility changes constantly over the course of a week, a month, a year, but making sure that the worry about food is off the table is my vision for ending hunger. And I'll just name that hunger itself is a driver of poverty. There's lots of drivers of poverty. We know here in Massachusetts, housing and childcare and all of these major costs associated with families drive poverty. And food insecurity itself, research shows, is a driver of poverty. I think it's a solvable one, and I think we can solve it soon, and we have to solve it soon. And so that's my vision. People not worrying about it, knowing there's supports out there they can rely on.
Okay. So all of us here in the room were not invited to the White House for this fabulous conference. All of you did attend. Hannah, I'm going to ask you to give us a summary of the conference, what happened, what took place, and again, why was it so important for this to happen?
Well, it was important to happen on many different levels. I mean, it had been 50 years since the first conference that was held by the White House on hunger, and we saw a lot of good policy come out of that. I mean, it was monumental to put that stake in the ground and say, this is an issue that we need to think about nationally, and we're going to say it from the White House, and we're going to galvanize people to do something. And I think, 50 years was too long to wait, and thanks to Congressman McGovern for his relentlessness in terms of saying, this is my number one priority. And, when you're asked for what a priority is and you choose that to be something, I mean, that's significant. There's a lot of other things he could have said, but he's continued to say this. And so having this second White House conference on hunger brought together, there was over 1,000 people there. Massachusetts by far had the most, which was really
As it should be.
which was
like
really
its own
exciting
caucus.
to see. And as Congressman McGovern said in his video, I mean, Massachusetts is recognized nationally as leading on these issues and thinking about how to end hunger. And so all of us there who participated in the day, we came back here immediately and said the White House conference on hunger was great. Being there, that sense of togetherness and purpose, and we can do this, was powerful. But it will mean nothing if we don't come back here and figure out how to do this together. Like, it was always going to be the together piece. And so we immediately, at the conference and immediately afterwards, started talking about how do we do this together? How do we create the plan? Because you can't one-off this. You need to think about this in the entirety. And, a lot of people continue to say White House Conference on Hunger, but it was a White House Conference on Hunger, Health, and Nutrition. And those two pieces are really important as well. As Erin said, Joe and Catherine, the integration, the realization of what happens when you end hunger, it also tackles a huge portion of diet-related disease. The impact to our healthcare system will be tremendous if we're able to do this. And so one of the things that we talked about when we came back here is, again, there is a humanitarian reason to end this. We're all clear on that. There's no one who doesn't get that. What is generally less clear, and is something we need to talk more about, though, is the fiscal benefit to ending hunger, both for the state as a payer and just at large. And I think sometimes we think about, if we talk about like money and saving money in the same effort as ending hunger, well, people will think it's gauche, right? We shouldn't talk about those two things together. No, we should. We really should, because where will we find the money to do the things that we need to do to end hunger? We're going to find it in the savings. We need to help people understand that. This isn't just something that's nice to do and will make us feel good about ourselves if we do it. It's necessary to do, and it is a way to alleviate a lot of the stress in our healthcare system. And I see many people from our healthcare system here today, and you're here because you know that too. And so, the White House conference was, obviously, President Biden started us off by the day. He was introduced by somebody who founded a company who had lived experience, which was very important because the lived experience is something we should never forget and we should be guided by in all of this. Some people bring their own personal stories to this, and there are those of us that might not have a personal story, but we need to be hearing them each and every day to make sure we don't forget them. And then we had small group sessions. And one of the sessions, and I think Joe was in it with me, there was somebody from the Midwest, I believe, who was talking about how they've solved this in their area because they've gotten down their per meal cost to like a dime. And Joe and I were sitting there going, that's horrible. Because that means you're not providing fresh, healthy, nutritious food. Like, you're looking at this, and I'm a business major, so I can say that, like, you're simply looking at this as how to drive down a cost in bottom line and check a box. And that's not what this is about, which is why when we came back here, again, we are looking at it as ending hunger, tackling diet-related disease, and strengthening our local food system. Because we need to make sure, as Joe said, a farmer, 94 cents, is what they make for every dollar they spend. You don't need to be a business major to figure out that doesn't work. We also have a very high proportion of people who are accessing our emergency and SNAP food system who actually produce food for us. Yeah. And so we need to be looking at this in totality, and I think that was our major takeaway coming back here to Massachusetts. And we're going to do this work together. We are joined at the hips. And we were working together before the White House conference, so this isn't something that we thought of sitting there. We've been paving the way to get this work done, and now we just need to start really driving home together. What is the way that we're going to solve this? What are the things that it doesn't become every year we have to ramp up in the legislature to get ready to battle for something? It's going to be in House 1, it's going to be in the House budget, and it's going to be in the Senate budget as a common amount of money. Just like education money is there, a platform, there always needs to be a platform of dollars that are there in order to make sure that we're able to do this.
Let me ask Joe about your impressions of the day and the importance of that White House conference.
I loved what Hannah just said. I could say ditto, which I often say to Hannah Kane, ditto.
Whoever goes first.
Yeah, exactly right. One of the things that struck me during the day, and I think we talked about this briefly, it's as if we were all being invited to look through just one lens, one organizing principle. And you said this well, right? There's many intersecting. We're all talking about the intersecting issues which drive us to poverty, create these food insecurity realities for too many of people in the Commonwealth. But here we have an organizing principle, and the organizing principle is end hunger by 2030. It's really quite simple. And there's one lens, and we're going to look through it together. And as we've all said, we've been doing this work individually, collectively for a really long time. But now, actually, all of us are invited into just this one view. So what's it going to take? So for me, I thought, this is a very clear goal. So I'm an organizer. I came to the legislature as an organizer. I think, I know what it looks like to end hunger by 2030. Of course, I want to talk about what that really looks like, how we're going to measure it, how are we going to really understand that we've done that. But then I started to think, okay, all right, we have a goal. Now what are the strategies? We have in the legislature, thanks to great advocacy, lots of programs, right? We have MIFA, the Massachusetts Emergency Food Assistance Program. We have a commitment to local grown in there. We have the Healthy Incentives Program. We have buy locals. We have lots of these different pieces of this mosaic almost that we've created thanks to great advocates, great agency heads, and legislative interest. But now we have to actually go back looking through this lens with this goal and examine these. Are these the right pieces of this puzzle? How are we going to integrate food as medicine? How are we going to integrate food system health and help for our farmers? How are we going to go upstream and really measure the benefits, the systemic benefits of ending hunger. So that for me was just a big clanging goal bell, and then just a lens. And now I'm having trouble seeing anything else but this through the lens, except for seeing all the moving pieces that we have to put together. And then the last thing I'll say is, we're going to put them together. We have them now, right? So we're going to test them and drive them and increase them and sharpen them. And then we're going to have to see if they're working together, right? We're going to have to see, are these the right pieces? Are we doing the right things? And we're going to have to be willing to innovate, let go of what's not working, lean into new ideas that will come from a wide community, inside, outside, and move us toward this new day where, I agree, we're going to see immeasurable benefit. Mm-hmm. And it'll be a virtuous cycle. Right now we're in this kind of middle ground, but I believe we can create a virtuous cycle where, as the population that we are, as the population of Massachusetts gets healthier and stronger, because there isn't this, this specter of food insecurity that's dragging us down, we're going to have to see how far we can take it in terms of the virtuous cycle going up.
Okay. Well, everyone here on the panel has said that, Massachusetts has been a leader in this area. And Joe, you started talking about some of the tools that are already in place in Massachusetts. So what I want to do now is talk about more about some of the specific tools and the policies that are in place. And I have a long list of things here. There's a lot happening. So I'm going to ask you to kind of give us the bullet version of the response. So federal policy on SNAP and WIC. Erin, talk about how we're going to make that work.
Yeah, first of all, both SNAP and WIC are incredibly effective anti-hunger programs. SNAP is the most effective anti-hunger program that our nation has, and we need to continue first and foremost here in Massachusetts to make sure people who are eligible for that program are enrolled. The legislature invested in a large-scale awareness campaign with Project Bread is leading on, one of the largest in the country, so a lot of gratitude to them because we knew awareness itself was a significant and major barrier. But I would also say, the SNAP benefit needs to be more. Biden increased the SNAP benefit for the first time in 40 years. It was huge. It was amazing. And then inflation quickly followed. And unfortunately, the added amount, the emergency allotment that was included during the pandemic is coming to an end in a few months. And it's going to have really significant repercussions for the million households right now in Massachusetts who are on SNAP. So we need to build the movement to make the case to strengthen this program. Okay. That is going to be a long strategy. You heard Congressman McGovern, it goes to the federal, but we need to be building that movement and making that case.
Okay, let's talk about college hunger. Catherine.
Sure. There's a great coalition in place, and that thank you for many of you in this room that have been working on that. It's one of those, again, very hidden issues. It surprises folks when you talk about it, especially college presidents, because they can't believe it's happening on their campus. I think we're resetting for a new legislature. We're going to file, I think it's a $4 million bill, so we want to ask for your support of that to move this through the legislature and create the mechanism so that colleges can access resources and move their campuses, again, from being food insecure to more secure for those students. The investment, the investment in younger people, and in especially some of the programs like WIC as an example, and what SNAP does, and what happens at school is so critical. But if we have failed those children still all the way through to their college years, then we have to do a better job. It shouldn't be. I love your idea of the way that you're thinking about working that up, and moving it forward. So if there's going to be a bill, we're going to need the legislators' help. For those of you that are representing here various senators and reps, that's something we can see a payoff very quickly by putting that infrastructure in place for colleges across the Commonwealth.
Okay.
All colleges. That it doesn't matter if you're an Ivy League or a 2-year college, it's there.
Hannah, give us your thoughts on the food security infrastructure grants.
So this was a really innovative program that was developed out of responding to COVID. So when COVID began, the governor stood up a food security task force. Catherine, Erin, Joe, and I were on it. with other members, both inside and outside of state government. It broke down the silos in state government and brought everyone together, and actually gave us a good roadmap of how to do this work after COVID as well. It also expedited dealing with a lot of issues that had been talked about for a long time, but because of the pandemic and the urgency, really pushed the issue. One of the things that we had to respond to was issues not only with certainly increased food insecurity, but also supply chain disruptions, and having to have agricultural producers and our fisheries producers totally change how they went about dealing with getting food, either to a large institutional user or to a family. And so credit is due, again, to a lot of the people who are on that task force, including Winton Pickhoff and Commissioner LeBeau and Assistant Commissioner Ashley Randall, of developing this program that was really to use for capital infrastructure needs, whether it be for a producer, an agricultural user, a fisher, or a food pantry. To have dollars that could go in to help them on a capital side. There were 1,300 applications the first round of this. ARPA money was used, and since we saw this overwhelming demand that was there, we recognized this is a program that needs to continue. And so we immediately in the legislature began to really say, this isn't something just needed to respond to COVID. This is a program that's needed to support the infrastructure needs that are out there. It's not just operating dollars that are needed in order to respond to reducing food insecurity and to help our producers. They need capital infrastructure needs. And so this is something, we're in our third round now, and is something that I think the administration, the previous one, and I believe the current one, is committed to understanding that this needs to be an integral part of how we respond to the challenges that we have.
Okay, Joe, talk about the inner workings, if you would, of the Food System Legislative Caucus and how you're keeping it running so that everybody is embracing everything and it gets out to the district level.
It's a good question. Among the most important things about the Food System Caucus, which Hannah talked to just very briefly, is that it is bipartisan. That is crucial. It's also really bicameral, held equally in the House and the Senate. We have co-chairs, Hannah and I, on the Senate side. It's Senator DiDomenico, who just joined, and Senator Goby, who's been there for since I came onto the legislature. And Rep. Kane Hannah has Rep. Dom, Rep. Vargas, Rep. Donahue, and Rep. Schmidt. So we're sort of a band of people together, and that strength is really wonderful because we can go back to our individual chambers and talk with our colleagues about these issues, right? We're talking a lot right now about the spending side, the programs, the food security programs, and the farm and the food system strengthening programs, but we also have a lot of policy priorities, and that's something that maybe we could talk just a second about, which is that many colleagues in the legislature have just finished filing bills. The timely filed bill day was January 20th. And among those are many legislative priorities that will be part of the strategies, I think, that we all embrace in this next push to 2030 and ending hunger. And so the Food System Caucus will do our bit to look at those proposals, to talk to our colleagues, to talk to leadership, to try to drill down on a really good list. And then we're going to fight like hell for that list. And that's everything from food waste, right? How do we reduce food waste and get that good food to tables, all the way toward other kind of infrastructure programs that are going to help our farmers. And so we'll work both the money side and the policy side in partnership with folks like Catherine and Aaron and all of you.
Government at work.
Yeah, it's good.
I love
It's
it.
good.
Catherine, talk to us about some of the lessons that we learned from COVID that we should be carrying forward in the future.
Well, so many. A pandemic, I think, changed everybody. Whether it's personal, you might have had a personal loss or a struggle. You had a kid at home that you had in daycare, used to have in daycare, now sitting across from you all week. Work environment changed. So many things changed. But what we did learn was the supply chain issue was a huge issue. It continues to be an issue. USDA's, as a matter of fact, there's still a challenge with all loads coming in. a tractor trailer will show up at the Greater Boston Food Bank today, and it was scheduled to be here December 10th. You know, it's drivers, literally CDL drivers, and it's literally individual. There's a greater need for CDL drivers if you're working in that area than there is nurses in this country. So it's just going to take more time. I think one of the most important lessons we learned is that, and I think I can get agreement from both our representative and senator, is that in the hard times, you can do the hard stuff. And it's hard to do the hard stuff in good times because it's, oh, we can't do that. You know, we don't really, but when it's hard, and I think the Food Security Task Force was a really good example of that. It pulled people together. Resources were made available by the legislature in a variety of financial support to make things move and happen. And we learned that the system needed to be looked at, right? And those changes, I hope, will last. So in the work of emergency feeding, many things that we learned is that the way we distributed food had to change. If you think of door-to-door delivery didn't exist. Drive-throughs didn't exist. The grab and go might have been a term used, but now it's a way you can distribute food. Emerging models were accepted into this new, like, oh, that is we could do that. Let's do that. For the Greater Boston Food Bank, we now have many top organizations that never touched food before COVID. Now they do. And they care about this connectivity of healthier foods and produce and how to move food. So COVID taught us a great deal, and I think the last, and I'll close, is we had to work together. Everybody was hurting. And that to me is and remains to me one of the greatest opportunities of our learnings. It's difficult to do it alone. You've got to move forward. How do we do this together? Because we know we can, because we did. And therefore, why not keep it going, even in these continued difficult times? So COVID taught us a great deal.
Talking about working together, keeping it going after COVID, you know, one of the successes of Massachusetts here, and Erin, is the fact that there are partnerships, there are coalitions. Talk about keeping that coalition together and the effort that you're leading on that front.
Yeah, so after the White House conference, Project Bread and legislators came together and said, you know, what can we do now? And so we brought together the people that were at the White House conference and put together some initial priorities, because timing was key. Legislators had to file bills last week. The Healy administration was coming in and thinking through a budget. So we coalesced around 19 organizations that were at the conference, coalesced around some key priorities, things like making free school meals permanent, things like implementing the common application so there's no wrong door, investing in cash assistance programs, and really having the Healy administration elevate this as a top priority. So that was the immediate work. But going forward, we want a bigger table, a bigger tent. And so really encourage those of you that are interested in getting involved to reach out. We need to be working together. It includes the legislative leadership that we have here today. It includes the advocates like Project Bread. It includes making sure people with current lived experience of food insecurity are informing the solutions. And that's a really critical piece of the coalition that we're leading on. So there's a lot of momentum, but we're going to need more stakeholders, more voices, and more advocates. So encourage everyone to get involved in that work.
Okay. You know, I want to get to this question here. The Social Security 8.7% cost of living adjustment is rolling out this January, and while it's expected to help people with additional funds, it's expected to impact the amount of SNAP benefits that older adults qualify for. And with emergency SNAP benefits ending, sunsetting very soon, I think the last payment is in March, how are Project Bread and the Greater Boston Food Bank preparing to help older adults' needs?
Well, we know it's coming. We've all talked about this cliff, and it's here. And you know, so our goal is to acquire as much food as possible, right? To keep the emergency food system pipeline full of product. And I will say to you, we can't meet that need. I mean, it's impossible. But what we can do is to do our best to make sure that that supply is consistent. This is a big deal. And this is a big deal for families, for individuals who will lose that benefit and don't have it. They will turn. They will turn to their schools, they will turn to their local communities, they will turn to their churches and synagogues and temples. They're going to turn to people to help. And so we will do our very best to continue to raise significant dollars to put more money in the pipeline. I will also say, I'm going to take a moment, this is a plug for MFAP, the Massachusetts Emergency Food Assistance Program, which comes through MDAR. This is the state saying, we're going to ensure that there's enough dollar power in here to purchase. Greater Boston Food Bank now buys 73 to 74% of its food. The donated food doesn't exist in the volume that you would think. But when we're able to buy and use MFAP dollars, that's the highest nutrition, that puts all the money back into the Commonwealth. It supports farmers. It's good for our businesses. And I'm going to call out two are here. Boston Gleaners is one of the MFAP vendors that's here that grows food, and Teddy Peanut Butter's in the room. Benefit. Those are jobs, J-O-B-S, jobs to those companies. And guess what? It feeds people. It's an awesome line item. So that's one of the things we have to do is protect it. Erin, I defer to Erin on federal programs. She's excellent.
Yeah, and I know DTA is in the room, the Mass Department of Transitional Assistance, and they've done an incredible job just making sure people know this is coming.
Yes.
That is half of it, is this looming. I believe it's the best in the country. It's multilingual, it's accessible, and so please, with all of your networks, get the word out so that folks know what's happening. But I think it makes the case, I mean, what we learned in the pandemic is that we can lift up these programs, we can strengthen these programs, and I think this makes a case that we need to make free school meals permanent here in Massachusetts. Let's stop repealing the programs. The child care tax credit, it worked. Food insecurity in Massachusetts was down to 10.8% in 2021. I'm not saying that was good. I'd like zero. But programs that work, child care tax credit, free school meals for all, SNAP, they feed people and they yield positive economic outcomes for our entire community. We need to be investing in those programs.
Okay. I'm going to ask our representative, what are some of the challenges? What needs to be done in Congress to make sure this farm bill goes through? And then talk about that and what you see as a call to action.
So hard.
Go ahead.
It's so hard to opine on the federal level without.
Give it a shot.
It was a major talking point at the White House conference was on the Farm Bill. Also a major talking point was the potential change at the time of leadership in Congress. Different states have different priorities, right? When you go into the Farm Bill, there's so much in that Farm Bill. Certainly the provisions around reducing hunger are in there, but there's also huge subsidies for other parts of the country that are part of a Farm Bill. So there's a lot, there are competing priorities within it. I know that we have the very best person in the room to fight for what we need, which is Congressman McGovern. He has built allies on both sides of the aisle to help in that and to be very persuasive in what it is that we need to have in there. And not only areas that we need to grow, but areas we need to protect to make sure they aren't cut back. There were other members of Congress who were at the White House conference who were part of that process as well and spoke very eloquently about how they will work to make sure the Farm Bill comes out in a way which is supportive of the issues, the policies towards ending hunger. But, it's difficult. Things in Congress are very difficult. They are very unlike what we have in the Massachusetts legislature, I'm very happy to say. We work in a very productive and collegial environment. We may have some policy differences at times, but they're actually policy differences. They're not partisan differences, and that's a key difference as we move forward in the work that we're going to do here. And I know that Congressman McGovern will do his very best, and we'll do whatever we can to support him from here. But we're also going to be very focused at the state level in terms of trying to move the dial on what we need to do.
Senator, if you were advising our friends on Capitol Hill in regards to this Farm Bill, what would you say?
Well, I think many of us have had conversations with members of Congress, right? Our Massachusetts delegation is exceedingly accessible with Congressman McGovern leading the way. Hannah started to talk about this. There's a lot in that farm bill. We need to make sure that it works for the kinds of food system and farms and communities that we have here in the Commonwealth. And so I would direct it to the small farms. I would direct it to food system resilience. I would direct it to real households with sufficient funds, right? No more shortchanging the kind of funding that we actually need. So, I don't think there's a better champion than Congressman McGovern here to get this right, and the Massachusetts delegation at large. And I think our job in the legislature, in the state legislature, is to work with a great governor and a great lieutenant governor and great House and Senate leadership to really make sure that we're ready to take the money that comes, the policies and the money that come, and put them to work here in Massachusetts with our added focus that we now have together.
We could talk about this until noon today, but I wanted to see if we can get one or two quick questions from the audience before we ask our panel for a very quick wrap-up, a call to action. Yes.
Hi, to capture this question in a little bit of context.
Please stand and tell us your name.
My name is Abigail. To capture this question in a little bit of context, my colleague and I work at a homeless shelter at a homeless drop-in center in Cambridge. And I was wondering if any of you guys could speak to any legislation, either at the state or the federal level, that are in the pipeline to deal specifically with issues of hunger in the homelessness space.
Okay. Who would like to take that? The question has to do with providing services for homeless residents of the state.
I'm not aware of any specific to the intersection of those two things. I know that a lot of the work that we do is intertwined, meaning we very much recognize that people in need are sometimes going to be housed and sometimes not, and we need to make sure that food is accessible, healthy, nutritious food is accessible. I do think, we have stalwart champions who also work on the issues of ensuring everyone has access to housing. But a lot of our work, a lot of the champions who have voices around reducing food insecurity are also doing a lot of work on making sure that people have access to housing. And so, it's a priority for many of us. I sit on a youth commission trying to address youth homelessness. And so, we take our different lenses and look at it that way. But I think they've been mutually supportive, but I don't know a piece of legislation per se. Again, there's probably 7,000 bills that have been filed in the last, so it's entirely possible I've missed something.
And I would say that the emergency food system intersects with the shelter system. So in Western Massachusetts, we have the Western Mass Network to End Homelessness. It's a cohort of about 110 organizations. Some of them are in the emergency housing, right? So homeless shelters or folks for shelters for folks who are houseless. And then there are also the food bank at that same table, really making sure that the services are integrated, right? And the access is integrated, both to housing supports, but also to emergency food and good, nutritious food.
Yeah, I'm not aware of a bill, but there is the connection, right?
Right. It's an important connection to make.
Programs serving homeless in a variety of ways, either in structured homes. There's Pine Street as an example here. The inn is very much a very small part of what Pine Street does. I mean, they own a huge amount of real estate to help people get into transitions into homes and apartments versus in a shelter situation. So we work with them. They're all eligible. All the food at the Greater Boston Food Bank, Western Mass, Worcester is free, and including Merrimack Valley. All of those, they need. If we're not connected with them, we should be. I think one of the important pieces that you bring about housing and food, it's much less expensive for us to feed you than it is to house you and shelter you. It's a much more challenging proposition for the legislature relative to the economics of it. We can feed you in a variety of places, on the street, off the street, in an apartment, at a home, in a shelter, so if we can shore up, and I think, Erin, I believe you said this about food insecurity, if we can tackle that piece, we're still going to have other problems, other challenges. But if we can put food on the table, but take the issue of food off the table, then we're going to be so much further ahead in some of these other. It is the least expensive of the issues to solve.
The other,
Great.
and I would just add, a huge initiative underway in Massachusetts right now is this flexible services
Yes.
program that's addressing both hunger and housing as key social determinants of health. It's recognizing that when people don't have housing and they don't have food, they have poorer health outcomes, higher healthcare costs. So the partners that we're working with, like C3, are addressing both. And so I think that is a really, really critical component. And I just want to go back to what my favorite Republican said. We got to make the business case. And I think what this program is allowing us to start to make the business case of why this is going to save money, why it's not just good to do, which I think we're all here because we believe in this, but it's good for our community and it's good for Massachusetts. So I encourage you to check out that program because that's really linking the two with a fundable model to address both of those and demonstrate positive outcomes.
Thank you, Abigail. Another one of my sheroes, Linda Downey, who's leading Pine Street Inn, has a whole program for ending homelessness, which intersects exactly with what we're talking about today. So I don't know if you have a chance to check out Linda Downey's Pine Street Inn website. There might be some information for you there. Thank you. Is there another question? Yes.
Hi there. My name is Jessica from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And I'm wondering, in thinking about the comprehensive link between eaters and their food access being dependent on producers and their ability to produce healthy food, I'm wondering what you see as a great challenge and a great opportunity for hunger and food production in terms of the climate crisis in our Commonwealth.
Okay.
It's a great question.
Wow. Go ahead, you start. I have a comment. Go ahead.
You want to start?
No, go ahead.
Okay, all right. Great question. Farms, keeping working and natural land open, and the work of our farms is sequestering carbon every second of every day. And that's one piece of the overall way that our Commonwealth will get to be this net zero Commonwealth, right? Which is one of the goals or lenses that we have to look through. So our farms are the front line of climate change, battling climate change every day. That's what they're doing. They're also starting to innovate themselves. So many farmers are doing something called low and no-till farming. This is thanks to MDAR in large part, right, for helping to incentivize this with programs, helping to build capacity. That's sinking even more carbon in the ground. And you know what? It's also increasing their yields. So these farmers are innovating, they're trying to figure it out, and they're actually growing more food. And I'll say, just building off of what Hannah said about the Food Security Infrastructure Grant, this is hands down one of the most important innovative grants that I've seen in my short time in the legislature, because these farmers are saying things like, hey, if you give me a washing station and I get to do a little bit more technical assistance with low and no-till farming, I can double my yield of potatoes. And you know where those potatoes are going to go? Some of them are going to go to the food banks. Yes. Some of them are going to go to grocery stores where people have access, hopefully with SNAP and HIP dollars. So this is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for us. The challenge is that we need the political and social will to both invest in the climate side of farming and then the sustainable infrastructure side of farming. The food security infrastructure did things like washing stations, but it also bought refrigerated vans. It helped our family farms up in my area figure out how to get more family farms to produce milk with them and bottle and get it out quicker. So it's a challenge. The magnitude of what's needed is challenging, but the opportunity for climate and health and food security is infinite.
Yeah, I agree. I think to me the word local should be prominent, right? To me it outstrips organic. Right? Because eventually those farmers will hopefully adopt more of those methods and more being able to do the organic methods and to address some of the issues the centers are doing and make the foods available. If I could have one wish for Massachusetts growers, I would extend the growing season by 5 months. Okay. That indeed is a problem. So then we have to look at, and I've asked the commissioner to do this when he said, how can I help you? I'm like, extend the growing season. But because we have such a short growing season and very limited products, how do we maximize that? So then it's looking at different kind of businesses for those farming families because they are contributors into our economy. But agriculture in general is only 1% of the GDP of our country. But we love it. It's our farms, it's our families, it's our history, it's the soil. And a shout out to Hadley Loam. It's one of the most productive soils in the world. Not the state, in the world. So, and having started the first food bank farm in America, I get this. So the more we can make the connectivity of other businesses for those farmers, extensions, I think that's an opportunity to push capital from the legislature into those businesses to keep them alive and thriving in their communities and a part of them. But extend the growing season, it would be a miracle.
We're going to take one last question, the lady in the orange, and then we'll do a wrap.
Can you have it?
Climate change we might be.
We might be.
I'm sorry, tell us your name again.
My name is Celia Brandt.
Hi, Celia.
Hi there. I don't think I need that.
I don't think you do either, but I've held it for like 10 minutes. I want somebody to use it.
Okay. This has been really interesting. And one of the things that I took away from the pandemic is that there are many more people than people on SNAP that are food insecure. And are there, or what are we doing to help those folks? So these are working people who still cannot afford to feed their families. How do we help them if they don't have access to the programs that we're putting in place?
And in fact, there are many middle income, higher income people that lost their jobs during the pandemic that didn't have the disposable income and the resources to feed their family. Stigma may have played into them not asking for help. How do we help those people to follow up on what's
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's a real issue. I think there's two groups that we're mostly concerned about: immigrant population. There are immigrant restrictions to the SNAP program, and then the groups that are just above income eligibility. We hear from folks every day, and I know the Department of Transitional Assistance, that I can't feed myself, I can't feed my family, and I'm not eligible for this program. Like, I am struggling, and so it's a real challenge. I think we have to continue to reinforce the other programs like free school meals for all, like WIC that does not have immigration requirements, and making sure families know what other programs are available to support them when they're not eligible. And then we've got to fight like hell to strengthen the SNAP program, and that's the political will piece you heard Congressman McGovern talk about. And that's our work here in Massachusetts, is to demonstrate why expanding these programs and strengthening these programs is critical. And I'll just end with, we have to hear the voices of also, there's also a group out there that just won't apply for the program, right? They're hungry and they are eligible. And we talk to those folks every single day, and we need to do a better job of making an easier program to apply for. That's the common application that we're working at the state legislative level. But you're naming, I would say, one of the biggest challenges that we are facing, and it's going to take our collective work together to address it.
And do more work to take the stigma out of applying for those SNAP benefits.
Exactly.
We are going to wrap up. This has been a fabulous conversation, and I'm going to ask each of you to think of, if you can articulate in 1 minute or less, your top call to action that you would like people to leave here today and think about, do, embrace, get involved in. I am going to start with Representative Kane.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here today and for hosting this panel on this really critical conversation. Sometimes I go back to my business classes, and I think about message discipline. And I think that this applies to the work that we're doing here. We need to come up with a plan. We need to be united in doing that work. And then we need to have message discipline around that plan, because we can't have everyone going in saying, this is the way we can end hunger, and it's one program or one thing, which is probably definitely going to contribute to it, but it's a thing. We really need to present a strategic plan that gets us to ending hunger, tackling diet-related disease, and strengthening the local food system. And we all need to be then messaging that together. And also getting our legislative leadership and the administration to see it in the totality and not in an individual thing, which is a challenge that we always experience.
Staying on message, staying on point is your call to action today. Senator, what's your 1 minute call to action?
I believe that government works when people make it work. I think there are a lot of people in the legislature that Hannah and I get to work with every day, and they would be here with us too in this. But the real ingredient, the real thing that's the most critical in the State House is you. Advocates, administration officials, folks across the Commonwealth. So I think that this is an opportunity for all of us to join together on message with goals and strategies and tactics, as Hannah's saying, and really bring the legislature a call to action. Because, right, our job is to represent. And when we feel the charge coming from constituents, it helps galvanize us inside in a way that is highly effective. So this democratic opportunity is the one thing that I would take away.
All right, Erin, your call to action in 1 minute?
I agree with Senator Comerford. I have yet to meet an elected official who's pro-hunger, but that does not mean every elected official prioritizes hunger. We're fortunate to have these two on stage. We're fortunate to have Senator DiDomenico and Rep. Vargas who are just doing it because it's the right thing to do. But we need to be mobilizing more legislators to make this a top priority, and that includes you as individual voters. I think it also includes your organizations and corporations who traditionally say, I don't want to get involved in policy and advocacy, I just want to donate money. Get involved. We need to bring more people to the table to advocate for these solutions.
Right. And Catherine, you'll close us out with your 1 minute call to action.
Just to summarize all of these things, I would say that advocates need to organize themselves with each other, right? That they have to come together, and I think that's where the message is. Because if we're all fighting for the same, dollar, it's just not where we're going to be effective in the state. So that's one. Two, I think we need to maximize all of the federal dollars available around nutrition programs in the Commonwealth. Talking about the awareness, we've got to maximize SNAP. The studies do show that people either are fearful for applying or that they don't believe they're actually eligible for applying. And so that's a factor. Maximize the federal nutrition programs. And lastly, I think as to our state, we have to expand the resources that you make available that directly get food, healthy food, to people, whatever those are. And there are going to be some really good ones, and I think we can get behind them early on together. That starts to see, picking those low-hanging pieces of fruit, and moving this forward. So I think it's possible.
I want to thank all of you for being with us this morning and being a part of this conversation.
Thank you.
Let's thank Catherine and Hannah and Joe and Erin for the work that they do 24/7, 365 on our behalf. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.